She had left 6 relationships in exactly the same way, always around the 2-year mark, always with the same suffocating panic, always with the same inexplicable certainty that staying would lead to something terrible. Her therapist kept asking what she was afraid of, but she couldn't answer because she didn't know. She just knew that when a relationship got too close, too comfortable, too real, every cell in her body screamed at her to run, and she always did, until the day she closed her eyes in a regression session and saw the moment that had programmed this pattern into her soul 300 years ago. Her name was Jennifer, and by the time she was 35, she had destroyed every relationship that mattered. Not through cruelty or betrayal, but through leaving. She would meet someone wonderful, fall in love, build something beautiful together, and then, like clockwork, around the 2-year anniversary, the panic would start. It began as a vague unease, a restlessness she couldn't explain. Then it would grow into full-blown anxiety, intrusive thoughts about needing to leave, about being trapped, about something bad happening if she stayed. And eventually, despite loving the person, despite having no logical reason to end things, she would break up with them and walk away. Her friends stopped trying to understand. Her family had given up asking when she would settle down, and her therapist, a kind woman who had been working with her for 3 years, was running out of conventional explanations. They had explored her childhood thoroughly. Her parents had a stable marriage. She hadn't been abandoned or traumatized. There was no abuse, no obvious wound that would explain this pattern. Jennifer functioned well in every other area of her life. Good career, solid friendships, healthy relationship with her family. It was only romantic relationships, only when they crossed that 2-year threshold of deep intimacy and commitment, that she fell apart. The most recent breakup had been the hardest. His name was Michael, and he had been different from the others. Patient, understanding, willing to give her space when she needed it. He loved her in a way that felt safe and real, and she loved him back with an intensity that terrified her, which is exactly why, at 1 year and 11 months, the panic had started again. She tried to fight it this time, tried to breathe through it, tried to convince herself it was just fear and she could stay anyway. But the panic only got worse, crescendoing into sleepless nights and panic attacks, until finally she did what she always did. She left. Michael had been devastated. He had asked her why. What had he done wrong? What could he do differently? And Jennifer, crying and hating herself, had told him the truth. Nothing. You did nothing wrong. It's me. There's something broken in me, and I don't know how to fix it. He had tried to convince her to stay, to work through it together, but she was already out the door, already running, already putting distance between herself and the suffocating terror that staying produced. That's when her therapist suggested something unusual. She had recently attended a training on past life regression therapy and thought it might be worth exploring. She explained that sometimes patterns that had no origin in the current lifetime, patterns that defied all logic and reason, came from previous incarnations. Unresolved trauma from a past life could bleed through into the present, creating fears and behaviors that made no sense in the current context but had been absolutely rational in another time and place. Jennifer was skeptical. She didn't really believe in reincarnation. She considered herself spiritual but not religious, open-minded but grounded in reality. Past lives seemed like something from a movie, not something that could actually explain her very real, very present problem. But she was also desperate. She had just lost another person she loved, and she could feel the pattern preparing to repeat itself again whenever she met someone new. She was tired of running, tired of being alone, tired of not understanding why she kept sabotaging her own happiness, so she agreed to try it. Her therapist referred her to a specialist, a man named Dr. Robert who had been doing regression work for 20 years. His office was comfortable and unpretentious, filled with books and soft lighting. He explained the process to Jennifer, how he would guide her into a deep state of relaxation where her subconscious mind could access memories beyond this current lifetime. He emphasized that she would be fully safe, fully in control, and could stop at any time if she felt uncomfortable. They scheduled the session for the following week. Jennifer spent the days leading up to it feeling a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. Part of her hoped this would finally provide answers. Another part was terrified of what she might discover. What if the reason she kept leaving was something terrible? What if there was no way to fix it? What if she was doomed to repeat this pattern forever? The day arrived. Jennifer sat in Dr. Roberts' office. hands trembling slightly as he explained what they would do. He would guide her into a trance state, then ask her subconscious to take her to the source of her pattern of leaving relationships. Whatever memory or experience held the key to understanding her fear, that's where her awareness would go. He reminded her that she was safe, that this was just information, just understanding, and that understanding was the first step toward healing. They began. Dr. Roberts' voice was calm and steady as he guided Jennifer to close her eyes, to focus on her breathing, to allow her body to relax completely. He used a progressive relaxation technique, having her tense and release each muscle group, feeling the tension drain away with each exhale. Jennifer felt herself sinking deeper into the comfortable chair, her awareness turning inward, the sounds of the office fading into the background. Dr. Robert counted her down, 10 to 1, each number taking her deeper into trance. By the time he reached 1, Jennifer felt like she was floating, her body distant and unimportant, her consciousness expanded and receptive. He asked her to imagine a doorway, a threshold between this life and others. He told her that when she walked through that door, she would find herself in the lifetime that held the answer to her pattern, the memory that would help her understand why she kept leaving. Jennifer saw the door clearly in her mind's eye. It was old and wooden, weathered by time. She felt drawn to it, compelled to open it. She reached out, pushed it open, and stepped through. And the moment she crossed the threshold, everything changed. The office disappeared. Dr. Roberts' voice became distant, and Jennifer found herself somewhere completely different, in a body that wasn't hers, in a time that had long since passed. She was standing in a small room. The walls were rough plaster, painted white but yellowed with age. There was a narrow bed against one wall, a simple wooden chair, a small table with a candle burning. The floor was stone, cold beneath her feet. She looked down and saw she was wearing a long dress, heavy fabric in a dark color, with long sleeves and a high neckline. Her hands were smaller than Jennifer's hands, rougher, with short nails and calluses from work. Dr. Roberts' voice came from somewhere far away, asking her where she was, what she was seeing. Jennifer tried to answer, and found the words came easily, as if she was remembering rather than making things up. "I'm in a convent," she said. "I'm a nun. My name is Sister Margaret. The year is 1687. The information flowed without effort, pulled from some deep well of memory she didn't know she possessed. Dr. Robert asked her to look around, to notice details, to feel what Sister Margaret was feeling. Jennifer did, and what she felt was fear. Sister Margaret was afraid, her heart beating fast, her hands trembling. She was waiting for something, dreading something, and then Jennifer heard footsteps outside the door. Heavy boots on stone floors, and Sister Margaret's fear intensified into full panic. The door opened. A man stood there, tall and imposing in dark clothing. He wasn't a priest or monk. He was something else, some kind of official or soldier. His face was hard, his eyes cold. He looked at Sister Margaret with contempt and something darker. He spoke in a language Jennifer didn't recognize consciously, but Sister Margaret understood. He was telling her it was time to face judgment, time to answer for her crimes. Jennifer felt Sister Margaret's confusion and terror. Crimes. She had committed no crimes. She had devoted her life to God, to prayer and service. But the man didn't care about her protests. He grabbed her arm roughly and pulled her from the room, dragging her down stone corridors, past other nuns who looked away, too frightened to help. Sister Margaret's mind was racing, trying to understand what was happening, why this was happening. Dr. Roberts' voice asked her to move forward, to see what happened next. The scene shifted, and Jennifer found herself in a different room, larger, with high ceilings and religious paintings on the walls. It was some kind of tribunal room. There were men seated at a long table, all of them wearing the dark robes of religious authority. The Inquisition, Jennifer understood with a jolt. This was the Inquisition. Sister Margaret stood before them, small and trembling. They read charges against her: heresy, consorting with evil, teaching false doctrines. Sister Margaret couldn't understand what they were talking about. She had done none of these things. She had lived quietly, followed all the rules, never questioned, never strayed. But then they brought out the evidence, and Jennifer felt Sister Margaret's world crumble. There were letters Sister Margaret had written to her brother, who lived in a distant town, letters where she had questioned certain church teachings, where she had wondered aloud about the nature of God and grace and salvation. Private letters, personal thoughts, never meant to be read by anyone but her brother. But he had been arrested for his own supposed heresies, and his house had been searched, and the letters had been found. The men at the table read excerpts from the letters, twisting her innocent questions into evidence of heresy. They asked her if she had written these words. She couldn't deny it. It was her handwriting, her thoughts. But she tried to explain that these were just questions, just a curious mind trying to understand faith more deeply. She had never meant to challenge the church. She believed in God. She loved God. These were the wonderings of a devoted soul, not the rebellions of a heretic. They didn't listen. Or they didn't care. Jennifer could feel Sister Margaret's growing horror as she realized that the outcome of this tribunal had been decided before she ever walked into the room. They had already condemned her. This was just a formality. They asked her to recant, to confess her heresy and beg for forgiveness. And Sister Margaret, terrified of what would happen if she refused, did what they asked. She confessed to crimes she hadn't committed. She recanted thoughts that had been innocent. She begged for mercy. But mercy wasn't what they had planned for her. Dr. Robert asked Jennifer to continue, to see what happened after the tribunal. Jennifer felt Sister Margaret being taken away, locked in a small cell, left alone in darkness. Days passed, maybe weeks. Sister Margaret prayed constantly, begged God to save her, to show the truth, to protect her. But no salvation came. And then one day, they came for her again. They took her to a public square. There was a crowd gathered, people she had known, people she had served, and in the center of the square was a wooden post with kindling piled around it. A stake. They were going to burn her. Jennifer felt Sister Margaret's absolute terror, the disbelief that this was actually happening, the desperate hope that someone would stop it, that someone would speak up and say this was wrong, but no one did. The crowd watched in silence or with dark excitement as they tied Sister Margaret to the stake. The men in religious robes spoke about sin and justice and God's will, and Sister Margaret, bound and helpless, had one final thought before they lit the fire. She thought about love, about how she had loved God so completely, so devotedly, about how she had given up everything for this religious life, about how she had stayed when she could have left, had committed herself fully when she could have held back. And this was what her devotion had earned her: betrayal, condemnation, death. As the flames caught and began to rise, as the smoke started to choke her and the heat became unbearable, Sister Margaret made a vow. She swore that never again would she fully commit, never again would she give herself completely, never again would she stay when every instinct told her to protect herself. Commitment had killed her, devotion had destroyed her, and if she ever lived again, she would remember this lesson. She would leave before anyone could trap her. She would run before the fire reached her. Jennifer felt the death, felt Sister Margaret's consciousness, separate from the burning body, felt the relief of release, mixed with the trauma of what had just happened, and she felt that vow sink deep into the soul, imprinting itself on the eternal part of Sister Margaret that would continue beyond death. The vow became part of the soul's programming, a survival mechanism designed to prevent this kind of betrayal and destruction from ever happening again. Dr. Robert guided Jennifer forward, past the death, into the space between lives, where souls go to rest and review. Jennifer found herself in a place of peace, surrounded by loving presences. These were her guides. She understood, beings of wisdom and compassion who had been with her through many lifetimes. They showed her what had happened after Sister Margaret's death, how that traumatized soul had carried the vow forward into subsequent incarnations. They showed her other lives where the pattern had played out. A life in the 1800s where she had been engaged to be married but had broken it off weeks before the wedding, unable to explain why. A life in the early 1900s where she had been in a long-term relationship but had moved to another country rather than commit further. And now this life as Jennifer, where the pattern continued but in a modern context that made it seem like personal dysfunction rather than soul-level trauma. The guides explained gently that the vow Sister Margaret had made had been understandable given the circumstances. She had been betrayed in the most horrific way, killed for the crime of thinking and questioning. The vow to never fully commit again had been a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation, but the vow was no longer serving Jennifer. She wasn't in danger of being burned at the stake. Her romantic partners weren't religious inquisitors. The fear that made her leave was a false alarm, a memory from another time being triggered by present circumstances that only superficially resembled the past trauma. The guides asked Jennifer if she was ready to release the vow now, ready to understand that she was safe, That commitment in this lifetime wouldn't lead to betrayal and death. That she could stay without being destroyed. Jennifer felt Sister Margaret's presence, that frightened soul from so long ago, and she felt such compassion for her. She thanked her for trying to protect her, for creating a survival mechanism that had seemed necessary at the time. But then, speaking both as Jennifer and as the eternal soul that contained all her lifetimes, she released it. "I release this vow," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I understand why it was made. I honor the fear that created it, but I don't need it anymore. I am safe now. Commitment doesn't equal death. Love doesn't lead to betrayal. I can stay. I can commit. I can allow myself to be fully known and fully loved without being destroyed. I release this vow. I let it go." As she spoke the words, Jennifer felt something break open inside her. It was like a dam releasing, like chains falling away, like a weight she had been carrying for centuries suddenly lifting. She felt lighter, freer, more open than she had felt in her entire life. Tears streamed down her face as the grief and trauma that Sister Margaret had carried finally began to dissolve. Dr. Robert brought her back to the present slowly and carefully, counting her up through levels of consciousness, reminding her where she was, who she was, when she was. When Jennifer opened her eyes, she felt different, changed, like she had left something behind in that past lifetime, something heavy and dark that she no longer needed to carry. She sat in Dr. Robert's office for a long time, trying to process what she had experienced. It had felt so real, so vivid, so completely unlike a dream or imagination. She had been Sister Margaret. She had lived that life, suffered that death, made that vow, and she had been carrying the consequences of it for 300 years, through multiple lifetimes, until finally, in this life as Jennifer, she had been given the opportunity to understand and release it. Dr. Robert explained that this was how Soulville healing worked. Trauma from past lives didn't just disappear, it stayed with the soul, creating patterns and fears and compulsions that seemed irrational in the current context but made perfect sense when you understood the origin. And the only way to truly heal these patterns was to remember, to understand, to acknowledge the wound, and then consciously choose to release it. In the weeks and months that followed, Jennifer noticed profound changes in herself. The panic about commitment didn't come back. When she thought about relationships, about the possibility of staying with someone long-term, she felt calm instead of terrified. The programming that had run her life for so long had finally been deleted. She was free to choose differently now. She reached out to Michael. They met for coffee and she tried to explain what she had discovered. He was skeptical at first, unsure how to respond to this talk of past lives and vows made centuries ago. But he could see the change in her, could feel that something fundamental had shifted. And more importantly, he could see that she was no longer running. She was choosing to stay. Not because she had to, not because she was forcing herself, but because the fear that had always driven her away was finally gone. They started dating again, slowly, carefully. Jennifer paid attention to her reactions, checking in with herself constantly, waiting for the panic to return. But it didn't. Even as they passed the 2-year mark, even as the relationship deepened into real commitment and partnership, Jennifer felt safe. She felt present. She felt capable of staying. She also did more research into the historical period Sister Margaret had lived in. She discovered that the Spanish Inquisition had indeed been active in the late 1600s, that nuns and monks had been accused of heresy for minor infractions, that burnings had been public events meant to terrify people into conformity. Everything she had seen in the regression aligned with historical facts, details she had no conscious knowledge of but that Sister Margaret had lived through. Jennifer thought often about Sister Margaret, about that devoted soul who had suffered so much for simply being curious and thoughtful. She felt such tenderness for her, such gratitude that her suffering had finally been acknowledged and honored and released. Sister Margaret could rest now. The vow had been lifted, the pattern had been broken, and Jennifer could finally live without carrying the weight of that ancient trauma. She noticed other changes too. She had always been somewhat guarded, even with friends and family, always maintaining a level of emotional distance that kept people from getting too close. But now that guard was coming down, she found herself able to be more vulnerable, more open, more willing to let people see the real her. The fear of betrayal that had driven Sister Margaret's vow had affected more than just romantic relationships. It had colored Jennifer's entire approach to intimacy and connection. And now that the vow was released, She was discovering what it felt like to be truly present with others without constantly planning an exit strategy. Her therapist was amazed by the transformation. In 3 years of traditional therapy, they had made minimal progress on Jennifer's relationship pattern, but one regression session had cracked it wide open, had given Jennifer access to the root cause in a way that years of talk therapy never could. Her therapist became a believer in past life regression, started referring other clients who had patterns that seemed to have no origin in their current lifetime. Jennifer became passionate about sharing her story. She started speaking at workshops and conferences about soul level healing and the impact of past life trauma on present behavior. She was careful not to claim that everyone's problems came from past lives, but she wanted people to know that this was a possibility worth exploring, especially when conventional approaches had been exhausted. She met others who had similar experiences, people who had overcome lifelong phobias by remembering past life deaths, people who had healed relationship patterns by understanding soul contracts and vows made in other lifetimes, people who had released chronic pain by accessing memories of old injuries carried forward from previous incarnations. The more people she talked to, the more she understood that this was far more common than mainstream culture acknowledged. Years passed. Jennifer and Michael got married. The day she walked down the aisle, Jennifer thought about Sister Margaret, about that frightened soul who had believed that commitment could only lead to destruction, and she sent her love across the centuries, thanking her again for protecting her, but also celebrating that the protection was no longer needed. Jennifer was safe. She was loved. She could commit fully, without fear. The cycle had finally been broken. She also thought about all the relationships she had destroyed before she understood the pattern, all the people she had hurt by leaving, all the love she had walked away from out of fear. She felt sadness about those losses, but also compassion for the version of herself who had been driven by trauma she didn't understand. She hadn't been running away from love. She had been running away from death, from betrayal, from a fire that had burned her 300 years ago. Jennifer wondered sometimes about her other past lives, about what other patterns and fears and gifts she might be carrying from those incarnations. She did several more regression sessions, exploring different lifetimes, understanding different aspects of her soul's journey. Each session gave her more clarity, more understanding, more freedom to choose who she wanted to be in this life, rather than being unconsciously driven by memories from other times. But the Sister Margaret regression remained the most significant. That was the one that had changed everything. That was the memory that had broken the cycle, and Jennifer carried it with her always, not as trauma anymore, but as a reminder of the soul's resilience, the power of understanding, and the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds across time and space. Looking back on her life before the regression, Jennifer could see how the pattern had controlled everything, how it had shaped her choices, limited her possibilities, kept her isolated and afraid, but she could also see how the pain of that pattern had pushed her to seek answers, had led her to Dr. Roberts' office, had opened the door to discovering her past lives and understanding her soul's journey. Nothing was wasted. Even the suffering had served a purpose, creating enough discomfort that she finally broke through to the truth, and the truth had set her free. Free from a vow made in terror 3 centuries ago. Free from a pattern that had repeated across lifetimes. Free to love fully, commit completely, and trust that staying didn't equal dying. The memory that had controlled her life for so long was finally just a memory, acknowledged and honored, but no longer running the show. Jennifer was in control now, making conscious choices based on present reality rather than unconscious reactions based on past trauma. She thought about Sister Margaret often, about that final moment before the flames rose, about the vow she had made to protect herself from ever being betrayed again, and Jennifer understood now that she was fulfilling a different vow. One she had made to herself in the space between lives, a vow to eventually understand, to eventually heal, to eventually break the pattern and live with an open heart. That vow had brought her to this lifetime, to this moment, to this healing, and she was grateful for it, grateful for the entire journey that had brought her from death by fire in 1687 to love and freedom in the present day. Subscribe to discover the past life patterns that might still be shaping your present choices.